Picture this. You're driving through Manhattan, your fuel gauge blinking red, and you start scanning for that familiar gas station sign. You drive one block, then another, then 5 more. Nothing. You pull out your phone, search for the nearest station, and the GPS tells you it's 2 miles away, across a bridge, in another borough. This isn't some dystopian future. This is New York City today, and it's about to get much worse. Welcome to the story of how hundreds of gas stations are vanishing from New York, why it's happening, and what it means for everyone who lives, works, or drives in the Empire State. Let's start with the numbers, because they're staggering. Shell, one of New York's biggest gas station operators with nearly 300 locations across the state, announced in 2024 that it would close 1,000 stations globally, 500 by the end of 2024, another 500 in 2025. While Shell hasn't specified exactly which locations are closing, New York stations are definitely on that list. But Shell isn't alone. To understand the full scope of what's happening, we need to look at Manhattan specifically, because Manhattan is where the crisis began, and it's the canary in the coal mine for what's coming to the rest of the city and state. In 2004, Manhattan had 60 gas stations. By 2014, that number had dropped to 38. By 2016, it was down to 52. Today, fewer than 41 stations remain on the entire island, and south of 96th Street, there are only 11. 7 of those are concentrated on just 2 avenues, 10th and 11th. South of 23rd Street, the entire lower portion of Manhattan, there is essentially 1 gas station left. 1. A Mobile station in the West Village. Think about that for a moment. Lower Manhattan, home to Wall Street, the financial capital of the world, with millions of people working there every day, has 1 gas station serving the entire area. Brooklyn has lost 9 gas stations since Superstorm Sandy in 2012, with another dozen at risk of closing in the near future. The borough president called it a land grab, like the California gold rush. And he wasn't exaggerating. These aren't just statistics on a page. These closures are reshaping the daily lives of hundreds of thousands of people. So who's being affected? Let's talk about the taxi drivers first. New York City has over 13,000 yellow cabs. These aren't people driving to work once a day. They're on the road for entire shifts, burning through tank after tank of fuel, and they're the ones feeling this crisis most acutely. One taxi driver described the new reality this way. After 4 p.m., forget it. That's why I come before 4. After 4, there's a line down the road. These drivers now have to strategize their entire shifts around when and where they can refuel. They're losing valuable time sitting in gas station lines, time they could be picking up fares and earning money. And it's not just yellow cabs. Think about delivery drivers, Uber and Lyft drivers, the entire gig economy that depends on being able to fuel up quickly, see, and get back on the road. Food delivery services, package delivery, service vehicles, emergency responders who need fuel. All of them are navigating the same shrinking network of gas stations. Regular drivers are affected too. One driver described trying to find a gas station on his GPS, only to discover it had completely disappeared. The location was still on the map, but when he arrived, there was a construction site where the gas station used to be. The few remaining stations in Manhattan are becoming incredibly busy, with constant lines. And because these stations know they have a captive market, prices have gone up. The Mobile station on East Houston Street charges as much as 15% more per gallon than the New York State average. The state already has the 5th most expensive gasoline in the nation, and the New York City metro area tops that by another 11 cents per gallon. Some drivers have started doing something that seems absurd. They're paying $15 to go through the tunnel to New Jersey just to buy cheaper gas. They'd rather spend money on tolls than sit in Manhattan traffic and pay Manhattan gas prices. So why is this happening? The answer isn't simple. There are four major forces converging to drive gas stations out of New York. First, and most obvious, is real estate. In New York City, land is more precious than oil. A gas station typically sits on a large corner lot, prime real estate in some of the most expensive neighborhoods in the world. Developers look at these properties and see luxury condos, office towers, hotels. The profit from selling the land and developing it dwarfs whatever a gas station could make in decades of operation. One real estate expert put it bluntly, "It's just a sign of the times." Gas stations that used to be fixtures of neighborhoods for generations are now sitting on land worth tens of millions of dollars. At the Manhattan Bridge entrance, where a mobile station once stood, there's now a hotel. On Atlantic Avenue, where there was a Shell station, there's now an apartment building. On 10th Avenue and 24th Street, a luxury condo replaced what used to be a busy service station. The second force is environmental regulations and compliance costs. This is huge, and most people don't realize how expensive it is to operate a gas station. Every gas station has underground storage tanks. These tanks are buried beneath the concrete, holding thousands of gallons of gasoline. And they're regulated by both federal and state law, because when they leak, they can contaminate groundwater, which is the source of drinking water for millions of Americans. The costs are staggering. Retrofitting corrosion protection to existing tanks can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $48,000. Installing 3 new 10,000-gallon tanks can cost $76,000 to $100,000, depending on the leak detection systems required. A leak detection system alone can cost $3,000 to $8,000 for a typical gas station with 3 tanks. And if a station owner wants to close down, removing underground storage tanks costs anywhere from $2,500 to $9,500 on average, and that's just for removal. If the tanks leaked, cleanup costs can run into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. One environmental cleanup for groundwater contamination can approach $225,000 or more. For older stations with aging infrastructure, these costs become impossible to justify, especially when combined with the high value of the land they're sitting on. The third force is the shift to electric vehicles and changing corporate strategy. This is where Shell's announcement becomes particularly important. Shell published its Energy Transition Strategy 2024 report, and it's revealing. The company stated explicitly that they believe growth in oil demand is set to slow in the second half of this decade and could start falling in the 2030s because of increasing vehicle efficiency and the growth of electric vehicles. Shell believes that gas will only play a backup role in the future, with the primary focus shifting to electric charging. So instead of maintaining a large network of gas stations, Shell is reallocating those resources. They're planning to expand from 54,000 EV charging points today to 200,000 by 2030. They've already acquired charging companies like Volta. They're focusing on China and Europe first, where EV adoption is further along, but the United States is clearly part of this long-term strategy. The fourth force is economic, the cost of delivering gasoline to inner-city locations. Getting fuel trucks into Manhattan, navigating traffic, dealing with limited access, all of this adds cost. Peripheral locations are simply more practical and profitable. To really understand what's happening, we need to step back and look at the history. There was a time when the area around Houston and Lafayette Streets was known as Gasoline Alley. It was the premier place in Manhattan for car services, gas stations, car washes, repair shops. You could come by at any hour of the day or night and get your car serviced. It was a thriving community of automotive businesses that served the entire city. Walk by Houston Street in the 1970s or 80s, and you might see everything from Muslim cab drivers gathering for prayer at gas stations before heading to local delis, to neighborhood joints serving workers and waiting customers. The whale of a car wash at Broadway and Houston was open around the clock. It was a complete ecosystem. The closures began as a trickle in the mid-1980s. At first, they brought about some interesting neighborhood transformations. The iconic fruit stand at Houston and Broadway opened where a gas station used to be. A furniture shop replaced another. In 1994, the famous Bowery Bar and Grill opened in a former gas station at Bowery and East 4th. But as land values exploded through the 2000s, the pace accelerated. The transformation went from interesting adaptive reuse to wholesale replacement. Gas stations became parking lots with billboards because even empty lots with advertising brought in more money than operating stations. Then those parking lots became luxury developments. By the time COVID hit in 2020, the last remnants of Gasoline Alley were disappearing. The intersection of Lafayette and Bleecker had been one of the shift change spots in the city, where cab drivers from far-flung corners of New York met to switch between day and night shifts. When ridership collapsed during COVID, that vestige was lost. Lahore Deli, which had served cheap fare to cab drivers across from a prominent gas station, finally closed in 2022. Now here's something fascinating that makes Brooklyn's situation unique. Brooklyn, or Kings County, has the highest density of gas stations per square mile of any county in America, and yet it also has one of the lowest rates of car ownership in the country. Only about 45% of households in Brooklyn own a car. This seems contradictory until you understand the dynamics. Even though a smaller percentage of people own cars, Brooklyn is incredibly dense with people. Those 45% of households translate to over 400,000 households with cars, and many of those have multiple vehicles. That's over 500,000 cars needing gas. Plus, Manhattan is rapidly losing its gas stations, so Brooklyn is absorbing some of that demand. Manhattan taxi drivers and delivery drivers are crossing into Brooklyn to refuel because they can't find stations in Manhattan anymore. This is putting additional pressure on Brooklyn's already busy stations. But Brooklyn is facing the same real estate pressures as Manhattan. As neighborhoods gentrify, as land values rise, the economic incentive to sell gas station properties and redevelop them becomes overwhelming. The borough president's warning about fuel deserts isn't hyperbole. It's a real possibility. Let's hear from someone who's living this reality. Harris Kalish co-owns 2 gas stations in Manhattan, a Beeho and a Gulf station. He's been in the business for 40 years. He told reporters that his stations are doing better than ever. Volume has never been higher because all these stations keep closing. Every year, 1 or 2 stations close, and he's sure it will happen again next year. But despite the increased business, Kalish knows his time is running out. He estimates the BP will last perhaps 3 or 4 more years. His Gulf location, which is incredibly crowded and profitable, probably won't survive the decade. Why? Because the land is simply too valuable. No matter how much money these stations make from selling gas, they can't compete with what a developer would pay for the property. This is the paradox gas station owners face. Their businesses are more profitable than ever because of the reduced competition, but that profit is insignificant compared to the value of the land they're sitting on. They're profitable businesses on death row. So what does all this mean for the future? In the short term, the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see gas prices continue to rise in New York City, particularly in Manhattan and increasingly in Brooklyn. The remaining stations know they have a captive market. When there's only one station serving Lower Manhattan, they can charge whatever they want. We're also going to see changes in how people who depend on cars for work operate. Taxi drivers, delivery drivers, service workers, they're all going to have to adapt. Some are already planning their routes around where they can fuel up. Some are considering switching to hybrid or electric vehicles, though the infrastructure for charging isn't quite there yet either. The city and state are at a critical juncture. Brooklyn's borough president released a report calling for action, suggesting everything from incentives for fuel retailers to add alternative fuels, to requiring backup power at fueling sites, to creating economic development programs specifically to preserve strategic gas stations. But here's the bigger picture. This is a preview of the energy transition happening across America. New York is just the first, the most extreme example, because the economic pressures are most intense here. But other cities will follow. The question isn't whether gas stations will decline, it's how fast, and whether the infrastructure to replace them will be built quickly enough. Shell's plan to build 200,000 EV charging points by 2030 sounds impressive, but there are currently over 150,000 gas stations in the United States. Each gas station typically has multiple pumps. You can fill up a gas tank in 5 minutes. Charging an electric vehicle, even with fast charging, takes significantly longer. The math is challenging. We're in a transitional period, and transitions are messy. The old infrastructure is disappearing faster than the new infrastructure is being built. For people who still need gasoline-powered vehicles, whether by choice or necessity, the next decade is going to be increasingly difficult. So let's come back to where we started. That driver searching for a gas station in Manhattan, watching the fuel gauge blink red, having to cross a bridge just to fill up. That's not an anomaly. That's the new normal. Hundreds of gas stations have closed in New York over the past 2 decades. Hundreds more are scheduled to close in the next few years. The forces driving this: real estate economics, environmental regulations, the shift to electric vehicles, the cost of urban delivery. These aren't going away. If anything, they're accelerating. What we're witnessing in New York is a fundamental reshaping of urban infrastructure. It's the end of the gas station era in America's densest city, and the uncertain beginning of whatever comes next. For taxi drivers circling blocks looking for fuel, for delivery workers losing time in gas lines, for regular New Yorkers just trying to keep their cars running, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. The question isn't whether this will happen in other cities. The question is whether those cities will learn from New York's experience and plan for this transition, or whether they'll just let it happen the way New York did, one closed station at a time, until people wake up one day and realize the infrastructure they depended on has vanished. That's the story of gas stations in New York. It's a story about economics and environment, about progress and disruption, about a city in transition. And it's a story that's still being written, one closure at a time.